The damn letter arrived on my desk like any other mail that morning. Plain white envelope, no return address, just my name, Elena Griffin, typed in crisp Times New Roman. I almost tossed it with the junk, but something made me pause. Bad fortune follows the keeper of rare blooms. The words stared back at me, each letter carefully cut from magazines. How cliché, I thought, trying to laugh it off. But my hands trembled slightly as I read it again. I glanced around my research greenhouse, where my precious orchids hung in their carefully controlled environment. After 15 years as a botanist, these rare beauties were my life's work. The letter felt like ice in my hands. "Hey, Elena, the Paphiopedilum samples need checking," my assistant called from across the greenhouse. I quickly stuffed the letter in my lab coat pocket. "Coming," I shouted back, but my mind was elsewhere. The past week had been rough. 3 rare specimens had mysteriously died, and now this letter. I needed a distraction, something completely removed from my world of plants and research. That's how I found myself enrolling in a literature course at the local community college. Victorian Poetry and Nature, the course catalog read. Perfect, just intellectual enough to engage my mind, but far enough from botany to let me breathe. The classroom was smaller than I expected, maybe 15 students total. I chose a seat near the back, feeling oddly out of place with my blonde hair twisted in its usual messy bun, lab notes still stuffed in my bag. Then she walked in, tall, confident stride, dark brown hair falling in perfect waves. The professor introduced her as Caroline Kelly, guest lecturer and director of the Colorado Springs Botanical Gardens. My heart did a little skip. I knew of her work, of course, but had never met her in person. "Today, we're discussing Emily Dickinson's garden imagery," Caroline began, her blue eyes scanning the room. They lingered on me for a moment longer than necessary. The discussion turned to Dickinson's In the Garden poem. When Caroline read the lines about nature's secrets, her voice carried a depth that made me lean forward in my seat. The speaker isn't just observing nature, I found myself saying. She's seeking revelation through it. The words tumbled out before I could stop them. Caroline's eyes met mine, a spark of interest lighting them. Exactly. The garden becomes a space of transformation. Her smile was warm, knowing. After class, I lingered, pretending to organize my notes. Caroline approached my desk, coffee cup in hand. "Your interpretation was fascinating. You understand gardens differently than most literature scholars." "I should," I laughed. "I spend most of my time with orchids rather than people." "The notorious Elena Griffin," she said, surprising me. "Your work on endangered orchid species is remarkable. I've followed your research." The way she said my name made my cheeks flush. Here was someone who understood both worlds, the scientific precision of botany and the wild beauty of poetry. As we talked, the threatening letter felt distant, almost forgotten. But later that night, as I locked up my greenhouse, the words came back to haunt me. Bad fortune follows the keeper of rare blooms. I looked at my orchids, delicate and vulnerable in the growing darkness. Something was starting, something that would change everything. I just didn't know if I should be excited or terrified. Over the next few weeks, Caroline and I fell into an easy rhythm of meeting after class to discuss poetry. The campus coffee shop became our sanctuary, where conversations about Dickinson's gardens bloomed into deeper discussions about Victorian flower language. "Did you know," Caroline said one evening, her blue eyes twinkling over her cup, "that in Victorian times each flower carried specific messages? It was like a secret code." I nodded, trying not to stare at how the setting sun caught her dark hair. "The language of flowers. Orchids symbolized luxury and beauty. And rare strength," she added softly, watching me. "Like their keeper." Something warm fluttered in my chest. Our conversations had started feeling less like casual chats and more like careful dances around something neither of us was ready to name. But my growing connection with Caroline couldn't completely distract me from the strange events at my greenhouse. First, it was just small things, moved items, disturbed soil. Then one morning, I found my prized Paphiopedilum rothschildianum wilting mysteriously. "This doesn't make sense," I muttered, examining the orchid. "The temperature controls are perfect, the humidity's right." My assistant suggested equipment malfunction, but I knew better. Someone had tampered with it. The anonymous letter's warning echoed in my mind. That evening, I mentioned the incidents to Caroline during our usual coffee meet. Her forehead creased with concern. "Have you reported this?" To whom? The rare plant police? I tried to joke, but my voice shook slightly. She reached across the table, her hand covering mine. Elena, this is serious. These are your life's work. Her touch sent warmth spreading up my arm. We'd been growing closer, but this felt different, more intimate. I have an idea, she said, her thumb absently stroking my wrist. The garden has a private research conservatory, state-of-the-art security system. You could move your most valuable specimens there temporarily. I started to protest, but she squeezed my hand. Please. It would make me feel better knowing your plants and you are safe. Later that night, we were comparing notes on Victorian flower symbolism in her office. The botanical garden was quiet, most staff long gone. Caroline was explaining the meaning behind different rose colors when she suddenly stopped mid-sentence. What is it? I asked, looking up from my notes. She was closer than I expected, her eyes intense in the soft lamplight. Red roses meant passion, she whispered. But white orchids, they meant, I dare to love you. My heart thundered in my chest. Caroline slowly reached up, tucking a loose strand of hair behind my ear. Time seemed to stop as she leaned in, her lips meeting mine in a soft, questioning kiss. Everything clicked into place. The lingering looks, the casual touches, the way my skin tingled whenever she was near. I kissed her back, letting months of unspoken feelings flow between us. When we finally pulled apart, Caroline rested her forehead against mine. I've wanted to do that since you first spoke about Dickinson's garden, she admitted. I laughed softly, my fingers tracing her jawline. And here I thought we were just discussing poetry, but our moment was interrupted by a crash from somewhere in the garden. We jumped apart, startled. Caroline quickly went to investigate, but found nothing amiss. Still, as I drove home that night, my lips still tingling from our kiss, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been watching us. The anonymous letter's warning felt more ominous than ever. But now I had more than just my plants to worry about protecting. Something beautiful was growing between Caroline and me, but like my rarest orchids, it felt fragile and threatened. I just hoped we were strong enough to weather whatever storm was coming. The threats escalated faster than spring flowers after rain. This morning, I found another letter pinned to my greenhouse door. Your precious blooms will wither, just like you. The paper trembled in my hands as I read it. Inside, my worst fears were confirmed. 3 more rare orchids, specimens I'd spent years cultivating, lay browning and lifeless in their pots. This wasn't random anymore. Someone knew exactly which plants were most valuable, both financially and emotionally. I called Caroline immediately. She answered on the first ring as if she'd been waiting for my call. Elena? What's wrong? They're dead, my voice cracked. My rarest specimens, someone knew exactly which ones to target. Pack your essential specimens now. Caroline's voice was firm, brooking no argument. You're moving them to my private conservatory today. I won't take no for an answer. 2 hours later, I stood in Caroline's state-of-the-art conservatory, watching as she personally supervised the installation of my surviving orchids. The space was perfect, climate-controlled, security-monitored, and most importantly, accessible only through her private key card. There's something else, Caroline said, once the last plant was settled. She led me to her office, pulling out a folder. I've been doing some digging. You're not the first botanist to receive threatening letters. My heart skipped. What do you mean? 3 other researchers, all working with rare species, got similar threats in the past year. All of them eventually lost their specimens. She spread out newspaper clippings across her desk. I sank into a chair, the reality of the situation hitting me. This is organized, professional. Which is why you're staying here too, Caroline said quietly. I have a small apartment attached to the conservatory. It's yours for as long as you need it. I started to protest, but she silenced me with a look. Elena, please. I couldn't bear it if something happened to you. The intensity in her blue eyes made my breath catch. She moved around the desk, pulling me to my feet and into her arms. Let me protect you, she whispered against my hair. That evening, Caroline opened a bottle of wine in her conservatory apartment. We sat surrounded by my rescued orchids, talking about everything and nothing. The wine loosened our tongues, and soon we were sharing stories we'd never told anyone else. I've never felt this way about anyone before, Caroline admitted, her fingers tracing patterns on my palm. It terrifies me how much I care about you. The soft lighting caught the silver in her dark hair, making her look almost ethereal. I leaned in, drawn by an irresistible force, and kissed her. She responded immediately, pulling me closer. We made love there, surrounded by the gentle whisper of leaves and the sweet scent of orchids. Caroline's touches were like poetry written on my skin, each caress a verse of devotion. In that moment, all the threats and fear seemed distant, unimportant. Afterward, lying in Caroline's arms, I watched moonlight filter through the conservatory glass. "Do you think they'll find us here?" I whispered. She tightened her hold on me. "Let them try. This is my domain, Elena. Nothing can hurt you or your plants here." But even as she said it, a shadow moved across the moonlit glass. I told myself it was just a tree branch, but deep down, I knew better. Our sanctuary wasn't as secure as we thought, and somewhere out there someone was watching, waiting. I snuggled closer to Caroline, drawing strength from her presence. Whatever was coming, at least we'd face it together. But I couldn't shake the feeling that our story was about to take a darker turn, like a beautiful flower hiding poison in its depths. Moving my research to Caroline's botanical garden felt like entering a different world. The conservatory became my new sanctuary, filled with rare specimens and state-of-the-art equipment that most botanists only dream about. Caroline gave me full access to her private research facilities. "Consider it your home," she said, her blue eyes sparkling as she handed me my security badge. "Though I hope you'll consider sharing more than just workspace." Working alongside Caroline was intoxicating. She'd stop by my station throughout the day, bringing coffee or simply standing close enough that I could smell her subtle perfume. Our professional discussions often turned personal, punctuated by stolen kisses between experiments. One morning while I was cataloging native Colorado species, Caroline burst into the lab. "Elena, you need to see this." Her excitement was contagious as she led me to a secluded corner of the garden. There, hidden among indigenous plants, bloomed a species we thought extinct in the wild. "Cypripedium fasciculatum," I breathed, kneeling beside the delicate orchid. "How is this possible?" "Nature always finds a way," Caroline said, watching me with that intense gaze that made my skin tingle. "Like us." We spent the next week documenting our discovery. Caroline insisted on keeping it secret until we could ensure the plant's protection. "Some things are too precious to risk," she said, though her eyes were fixed on me rather than the orchid. Our days fell into a comfortable rhythm. Mornings in the research lab, afternoons exploring the garden's hidden corners, evenings spent planning conservation strategies. But it was the nights I treasured most. One evening, Caroline suggested a moonlight walk through the garden. The air was heavy with the scent of night-blooming flowers, and the pathlights cast soft shadows around us. "I never showed anyone else this place," she said, leading me through a hidden gate. Beyond lay a secret garden, filled with luminescent plants that glowed softly in the darkness. "It's beautiful," I whispered, watching the ethereal display. But when I turned to Caroline, she wasn't looking at the plants. "You're beautiful," she said softly, pulling me close. Her kiss tasted like moonlight and possibility. We swayed together among the glowing flowers, lost in our own world. Later, as we lay on a blanket beneath the stars, Caroline traced patterns on my bare shoulder. I never thought I'd find someone who understands both the science and the poetry of plants. I propped myself up on an elbow, studying her face in the moonlight. I never thought I'd find someone who makes me feel both completely safe and absolutely terrified. She laughed softly. "Terrified?" "Of how much I feel for you," I admitted. "Of how quickly you've become essential to me." Caroline's response was to pull me down for another kiss, slow and deep. The garden around us seemed to pulse with life and promise. But even in our perfect moment, reality intruded. A security alarm blared in the distance, making us both jump. Caroline quickly called it just a false alarm, a system glitch. Yet as we walked back to the conservatory, holding hands in the darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that our bubble of happiness was fragile. The threats might have stopped, but something told me our troubles weren't over. Back in our apartment above the garden, I watched Caroline sleeping peacefully beside me. The moonlight silvered her dark hair, and I felt that familiar ache in my chest, love mixed with fear of loss. My rare orchids were thriving in their new home. I was falling deeper in love each day, and yet, the anonymous letter's warning still echoed in my mind. Bad fortune follows the keeper of rare blooms. I curled closer to Caroline, drawing comfort from her warmth. Whatever storms were coming, I had found my safe harbor. I just prayed it would be strong enough to weather what lay ahead. The email from the grant committee hit like a sucker punch to the gut. Due to unforeseen circumstances, we regret to inform you. I read it 3 times, hoping the words would somehow change. My research grant, the funding that supported my entire rare orchid conservation project, had been mysteriously canceled. No explanation, no appeal process, just a cold formal notice ending years of work. "This makes no sense," Caroline said, pacing her office after I showed her the email. "Your research results are exemplary. The preliminary reviews were all positive." I sank into her leather chair, feeling numb. "Without this funding, I can't continue the preservation program, all those endangered species." Caroline stopped pacing and knelt before me, taking my hands in hers. "We'll figure this out. The garden can provide temporary funding." A sharp knock interrupted us. Martha Blackwood, head of the garden's board of directors, stood in the doorway. Her thin lips pressed into an even thinner line when she saw our joined hands. "Caroline, a word?" Her tone made it clear this wasn't a request. "In private." I squeezed Caroline's hand before leaving, but lingered outside the door. Their voices carried through the wood. "This relationship is inappropriate," Martha's words dripped with disapproval. "You're the director of this institution. Your personal choices reflect on all of us. My personal life is none of the board's business." Caroline's voice was steel. "It is when you're housing your friend and garden property. When you're offering garden resources for her failed research." My chest tightened. Was this why my grant was canceled? Had someone pulled strings because of my relationship with Caroline? "Elena Griffin is a brilliant botanist," Caroline shot back. "Her work could save dozens of species from extinction. If you're letting prejudice blind you." "The board meets next week," Martha cut in. "I suggest you consider your priorities carefully before then." I hurried away before the door opened, my mind spinning. Everything I'd built was crumbling, and now I was putting Caroline's career at risk too. That evening, Caroline found me in the conservatory, pretending to work. "Elena," she said softly, "stop hiding from me." "I'm not hiding," I lied, fiddling with my research notes. "I'm just busy trying to figure out how to save my life's work." She took the papers from my hands, setting them aside. "Look at me." When I finally met her eyes, they were fierce with determination. "I don't care what the board thinks. I don't care about their threats. I care about you. But your career—" She silenced me with a kiss that left no room for doubt. We made love there in the conservatory, surrounded by the very plants we were fighting to protect. Caroline's touches were both gentle and desperate, as if she was trying to prove something to both of us. Afterward, wrapped in her warmth, I whispered, "I can't let you sacrifice everything for me." "You're not letting me do anything," she murmured against my hair. "I'm choosing this. Choosing us." But as we lay there, the greenhouse glass reflecting moonlight, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was orchestrating all of this, the threats, the grant cancellation, the board pressure, someone who wanted not just to separate us, but to destroy everything we'd worked for. I held Caroline tighter, breathing in her familiar scent. We'd created something rare and beautiful, like the endangered flowers we protected. But like those same flowers, our relationship was under threat. Tomorrow, we'd have to face the reality of lost funding and board politics. But tonight, in our glass-walled sanctuary, we had each other. I just prayed it would be enough to weather the storm that was clearly gathering force. The anonymous letter's warning echoed in my mind. "Bad fortune follows the keeper of rare blooms." I was starting to understand just how prophetic those words had been. I wasn't snooping. Not really. I was just looking for spare plant labels in Caroline's office when I found them. A stack of threatening letters, identical to mine, hidden in her bottom drawer. My hands shook as I read them. "Your garden of secrets will wither. Some flowers should stay buried." Each one dated months before I received my first threat. The office door creaked. I spun around to find Caroline standing there, coffee cups in hand. Her face went pale when she saw the letters. "Elena, I can explain," she started, but I was already backing away. "You knew," I whispered. "All this time you knew who was behind this. You let me think I was the target." She set down the cups, reaching for me. "It's complicated. I was trying to protect you." "Protect me?" My voice rose. "By keeping me in the dark? By letting my research get destroyed?" "That's not what happened." Caroline ran a hand through her dark hair. Martha Blackwood. She used to be more than just a board member to me. The revelation hit like ice water. You and Martha? Years ago, before she joined the board. It ended badly. Caroline's eyes pleaded with me to understand. When she found out about us, about my feelings for you. She's behind the threats? The grant cancellation? Caroline nodded miserably. She's always been possessive. When she saw us getting closer, she threatened to expose some creative accounting from my early days as director. So you chose to protect your reputation instead of warning me? The hurt in my voice made her flinch. No, I thought I could handle her. I never imagined she'd go after your research. Caroline moved closer. Elena, please. Everything I did was to keep you safe. Safe? I laughed bitterly. I lost years of work. My reputation is in shambles. And all this time you knew why. I love you, she said softly. I was afraid if you knew the truth, you'd leave. The words hung between us, the first time either of us had said them. Under different circumstances, my heart would have soared. Love isn't about protection through deception, I said, my voice breaking. It's about trust. I turned to leave, but Caroline caught my wrist. Wait, there's more you need to know. Before she could continue, Martha herself appeared in the doorway. Her thin smile reminded me of a Venus flytrap about to snap shut. How touching, she drawled. Caroline's always had a weakness for pretty young things in distress. Get out. Caroline's voice was ice. The board meeting's tomorrow. Martha continued as if she hadn't spoken. Such a shame about Dr. Griffin's grant, and those mysterious plant deaths. My fists clenched. You destroyed my research to punish Caroline? I merely exposed vulnerabilities in the system. Martha's smile widened. Systems need strong leadership, not emotional entanglements. Caroline stepped between us. Enough. This ends now. Does it? Martha raised an eyebrow. Are you ready for everyone to know about the financial irregularities? About how you really secured the director position? I watched Caroline's shoulders tense, saw the fear flash across her face. But then she straightened, something fierce and determined settling over her features. Tell them, she said quietly. Tell them everything. I'm done letting you poison everything good in my life. Martha's smile faltered. For the first time, she looked uncertain. I moved to Caroline's side, taking her hand. The touch seemed to give her strength. You can destroy my career, Caroline continued. But you can't destroy this. What Elena and I have, it's rare, beautiful. And I choose it over everything else. Martha's face twisted with rage, but before she could respond, I stepped forward. And I choose forgiveness, I said, surprising myself as much as Caroline. Not for you, Martha, but because love isn't about keeping secrets. It's about having the courage to face truth together. As Martha stormed out, Caroline turned to me, tears in her eyes. I'm so sorry, can you really forgive me? I pulled her close, kissing her softly. We protect rare things by bringing them into the light, I whispered against her lips, not by hiding them in darkness. Outside the office window, the setting sun painted the garden in shades of gold. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight, truth had finally bloomed between us, as delicate and precious as any rare flower. The botanical conference hall buzzed with anticipation. I stood backstage, gripping my presentation notes until my knuckles turned white. This wasn't just any presentation. It was my first public appearance since the grant cancellation scandal. Breathe, Caroline whispered, adjusting my collar. You've got this. Your research speaks for itself. I caught her hand, drawing strength from her touch. After everything we'd been through, her faith in me never wavered. Ladies and gentlemen, the moderator announced, please welcome Dr. Elena Griffin, presenting her groundbreaking work on endangered orchid species preservation. Walking onto that stage felt like stepping into battle. But as I began speaking about my research, something magical happened. The audience leaned forward, captivated by the data showing unprecedented success rates in preserving endangered species. Through our innovative cultivation techniques, I explained, clicking through slides of thriving orchids, we've achieved an 85% survival rate for species previously considered impossible to maintain in captivity. The questions afterward were enthusiastic, focused entirely on the science. Not one person mentioned the grant controversy. As I stepped down from the podium, the applause was thunderous. That was brilliant, Caroline beamed, hugging me tight. Did you see their faces when you showed the survival statistics? Before I could respond, we were surrounded by fellow botanists eager to discuss collaboration opportunities. Several offered research partnerships, complete with funding. Dr. Griffin, a distinguished-looking woman, approached. I'm from the International Botanical Conservation Society. We'd love to feature your work in our next journal. Later, at the conference reception, Caroline couldn't stop grinning. You've done it, love. You've shown them all what really matters: the science, the plants, the preservation of beauty. She was right. Despite Martha's attempts to discredit me, the botanical community had judged my work on its merits, and they'd found it worthy. We slipped away from the reception early, heading to our favorite spot in the garden. The evening air was sweet with jasmine, and fairy lights twinkled in the trees. I have something for you, Caroline said, pulling out a small box. Inside lay a delicate silver pendant shaped like an orchid. It's beautiful, I whispered, as she fastened it around my neck. Like you, she murmured, her fingers lingering on my skin. Strong and rare and absolutely remarkable. We made love under the stars, celebrating more than just professional victory. Each touch felt like validation, every kiss a reminder that we'd chosen truth over fear. Afterward, wrapped in Caroline's embrace, I traced patterns on her shoulder. The board meeting's tomorrow. Let them try to separate us now, she said fiercely. Your research is making headlines. They can't ignore that. But your position is less important than being true to myself. She propped herself up on an elbow, looking down at me intently. I spent too many years hiding who I am, letting people like Martha control me through fear. No more. I reached up to touch her face, marveling at how this incredible woman had chosen me. We're stronger together. Like your orchids, she smiled, thriving against all odds. A shooting star streaked across the sky, and I made a silent wish. Not for professional success or vindication, but for these moments with Caroline, this love that had bloomed so unexpectedly in my life. Tomorrow would bring its challenges. The board might still try to force Caroline out. There might be more battles ahead, but tonight, under a canopy of stars, we were exactly where we needed to be. I fingered the orchid pendant, thinking how fitting it was. Like the rare flowers we protected, our love had faced threats and challenges. But also like those flowers, it had proven resilient, beautiful, and absolutely worth fighting for. What are you thinking about? Caroline asked softly. About how some things need to be protected, I answered, and how others are strong enough to protect themselves. She kissed me then, slow and deep, and I knew that whatever tomorrow brought, we'd face it together, standing tall like the rarest blooms in our garden of truth. The truth hit like a thunderbolt during the emergency board meeting. Martha wasn't just Caroline's ex, she was the anonymous sender who'd been threatening us both. I can explain everything. Martha's composure cracked as security escorted her into the boardroom. The evidence spread across the table was damning. Copies of threatening letters, surveillance footage, even receipts for magazine clippings. Caroline stood at the head of the table, every inch the garden director, despite her obvious exhaustion. Explain why you terrorized a respected researcher, why you sabotaged valuable scientific work? I watched from my seat, still processing how the pieces had fallen together. It was Caroline's assistant who'd made the connection, finding similarities between Martha's official memos and the anonymous threats. I was protecting the garden. Martha's voice shook. When I saw how she was affecting you, how you were changing everything for her. You mean when you saw me happy? Caroline's voice was steel. When you saw me finally living truthfully? The board members shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't just about professional misconduct anymore. It was about personal vendetta, about someone unable to let go of the past. Do you know what you nearly destroyed? I spoke up, surprising myself. Those orchids weren't just plants, they were hope for entire species. Some of them might be extinct now because of your jealousy. Martha's face twisted. You don't deserve her. You swanned in here with your grants and your research, taking everything I'd worked for. That's enough, the board chairman interrupted. Ms. Blackwood, you're facing serious charges. Professional sabotage, harassment, potential federal crimes involving grant interference. As security led Martha away, I caught a glimpse of something broken in her eyes. Despite everything she'd done, I felt a flicker of pity. Love turned toxic was still, at its root, love. Later that evening, Caroline and I sat in her office, processing the day's events. My research grant had been reinstated with a formal apology, and Martha had resigned from the board. I should have seen it, Caroline sighed, rubbing her temples. All those years working together, I never realized she was capable of this. I moved behind her chair, massaging her shoulders. Sometimes we don't see what we don't want to see. She leaned back into my touch. I kept our past relationship secret because I was ashamed, not of her, but of how long I let her influence my decisions. The past shapes us, I said softly, but it doesn't define us. Caroline turned, pulling me into her lap. When did you get so wise? Probably around the same time I fell in love with a brilliant garden director who taught me that growth requires both darkness and light. She kissed me then, slow and sweet, healing and promise wrapped together. Outside her office window, the garden glowed in the evening light, our rare orchids thriving in their protected sanctuary. I've been thinking, Caroline said when we finally parted. The garden's due for expansion. We could use a new research director. My heart skipped. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you a partnership, she smiled. In every sense of the word. I pretended to consider it, even as joy bubbled up inside me. Won't people talk? The director and the research head? Let them, she said firmly. I'm done hiding who I am and who I love. As if in response, the evening air filled with the sweet scent of night-blooming flowers. Our garden was healing, just like we were, growing stronger through adversity. Besides, Caroline added with a mischievous smile, I hear the director gives excellent benefits. I laughed, kissing her again. The worst was behind us now. Martha's demons had been exposed to the light, like the roots of a struggling plant finally given room to breathe. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, budget meetings, research proposals, the constant dance of preservation and progress. But tonight, in this office where our story began, we could simply be two women who'd found each other among rare blooms and rarer chances. So, Caroline murmured against my lips, is that a yes? I answered with another kiss, knowing that sometimes the most beautiful things grow from the darkest soil. Spring brought new life to the botanical garden. Caroline and I spent countless hours planning the rare species section, a testament to second chances and fresh beginnings. What do you think about creating microhabitats? I asked, spreading blueprints across our shared office desk. We could showcase how these species adapt to different environments. Caroline leaned over my shoulder, her presence warm and familiar. Brilliant idea. We could make it educational and beautiful. The garden's renovation had become our shared passion project. Every decision we made together, from climate control systems to viewing platforms, reflected our combined vision. But not everyone appreciated our partnership. Despite Martha's departure, whispers still followed us through the garden paths. Some board members questioned the appropriateness of our relationship. Did you see the email from Thompson? Caroline sighed one morning. He's concerned about public perception again. I squeezed her hand. Let them talk. Our work speaks for itself. And it did. Under our joint leadership, the garden had secured more research grants than ever before. Our rare species program was becoming a model for conservation efforts worldwide. One evening, as sunset painted the greenhouse in amber light, Caroline led me to the rooftop garden we'd created together. String lights twinkled overhead, and the air was heavy with the scent of night-blooming jasmine. Elena, she said softly, taking my hands in hers. Remember when we first met, discussing Emily Dickinson's garden poems? I smiled at the memory. You said gardens were spaces of transformation. They are. She touched the orchid pendant she'd given me months ago. Just like love transforms us. My heart began to race as she dropped to one knee. The ring she held caught the fading sunlight, sparkling like morning dew. Elena Griffin, her voice trembled slightly. Will you transform every garden, face every challenge, and share every season with me? Will you marry me? Tears blurred my vision as I pulled her to her feet. Yes, I whispered against her lips. 1,000 times yes. We celebrated with champagne among the flowers, our laughter echoing across the rooftop. Everything felt possible in that moment, bathed in sunset light and newfound joy. The next morning, we faced the board together to present our engagement alongside plans for the garden's future. Some members shifted uncomfortably, but others smiled warmly. Your personal lives are your own, Chairman Rogers said finally. As long as the garden continues to thrive under your leadership, you have our support. Walking through the garden later, hand in hand, we passed a group of visitors admiring our new rare species display. Their faces showed wonder, not judgment. "Look at that couple," a young woman whispered to her friend. "They're the ones who saved these beautiful plants. Isn't it romantic?" Caroline squeezed my hand, her engagement ring catching the light. "Hear that? We're romantic." "Absolutely scandalous," I teased back. Two botanists, falling in love among endangered flowers. We stopped by my favorite orchid display, where the first specimens I'd saved still thrived. Like us, they had weathered threats and emerged stronger. "You know," Caroline mused, "Martha actually did us a favor." I raised an eyebrow. "How so?" "Her threats brought us closer together, made us fight for what matters." She touched a delicate flower petal. "Sometimes the most beautiful things grow from adversity." Looking at her in that moment, surrounded by the life we'd protected and nurtured together, I knew she was right. Our love had bloomed like a rare flower, precious because of its struggles, not in spite of them. "So," I said, pulling her close, "ready to scandalize the botanical world with a garden wedding?" Her answering kiss tasted like sunshine and possibility. Above us, the greenhouse glass reflected golden light, creating a cathedral of glass and green, where love grew wild and free. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, wedding plans, conservation projects, the constant balance of personal and professional. But tonight, we were simply two women who had found each other among rare blooms and rarer chances, planning a future as intertwined as the vines in our garden. The news came on a crisp autumn morning. My research on endangered orchid preservation had won the International Botanical Excellence Award. Caroline burst into our shared office, waving the notification letter. "You did it, love." She lifted me off my feet in an enthusiastic embrace. "Though I never doubted you would." The recognition meant more than just professional validation. It was proof that truth and persistence could overcome any obstacle. My work, once threatened and discredited, had risen to international acclaim. "We did it," I corrected her, touching the orchid pendant that never left my neck. "I couldn't have done this without you." The award ceremony was scheduled for next month in London. As I prepared my acceptance speech, I couldn't help reflecting on how far we'd come from those first threatening letters and whispered judgments. "Listen to this part," I said to Caroline, reading from my draft. "In preserving rare species, we preserve hope itself, hope that beauty can survive in an increasingly hostile world." She wrapped her arms around me from behind. "Perfect. Just like you." Back at the garden, changes were blooming everywhere. Caroline had successfully restructured the board, bringing in younger, more progressive members. Our rare species section had become a major attraction, drawing visitors and researchers from around the world. "Dr. Griffin," a young botanical student, caught me between meetings. "Your paper on adaptive cultivation techniques changed everything. Would you consider mentoring me?" These moments made every struggle worthwhile. Seeing the next generation passionate about conservation, about protecting Earth's rarest treasures. One evening, I found Caroline in our rooftop garden, surrounded by candlelight. She'd prepared dinner among the flowers, my favorite dishes, champagne chilling in an ice bucket. "What's the occasion?" I asked, though my heart swelled at her thoughtfulness. "Do I need one?" She pulled out my chair. "Maybe I just want to celebrate us." Over dessert, she shared her plans for the garden's future. "I'm thinking of establishing a scholarship program," she said, "for young women in botanical research." "That's brilliant." I reached for her hand across the table. "Opening doors for others like us." "Speaking of opening doors," she smiled mysteriously, "I have another surprise." She led me to the greenhouse where we'd first kissed. Inside, she'd transformed the space into a private sanctuary. Fairy lights twinkled among the leaves, and soft music played from hidden speakers. "Dance with me," she whispered, pulling me close. As we swayed among the rare blooms we'd saved together, I felt tears prick my eyes. Every hardship, every battle had led to this perfect moment. "Remember when you first moved your orchids here?" Caroline murmured against my hair. "You were so worried about them surviving." I laughed softly. "And look at them now, thriving, just like us." She pulled back slightly, her blue eyes intense in the soft light. "You know, there's something poetic about it, How love and rare flowers both need the right conditions to bloom. Protection, I added, thinking of our journey. Understanding. Trust, she finished, kissing me tenderly. And courage to stand in the light. We made love there in our greenhouse sanctuary, surrounded by the living testimony of our shared passion. Each touch was a celebration of survival, of love that had grown stronger through adversity. Later, wrapped in Caroline's embrace, I watched moonlight filter through the glass ceiling. The garden around us hummed with nocturnal life, night-blooming flowers opening their petals, moths dancing between the leaves. "What are you thinking about?" Caroline asked, tracing patterns on my skin. "How sometimes the most beautiful things grow in unexpected places," I answered. "Like rare orchids in a hostile world, like us." She pulled me closer, and I breathed in her familiar scent, earth and flowers and home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles to fight. But tonight, in our garden of rare blooms and rarer love, everything was perfect. "I love you," I whispered into the quiet night. "More than all the rare flowers in the world." Her answering kiss tasted like moonlight and possibility, like seeds waiting to bloom into something even more beautiful. The World Botanical Conference buzzed with anticipation as Caroline and I took the stage together. 5 years had passed since that first threatening letter, and here we were, presenting our groundbreaking work on endangered species preservation. "Ladies and gentlemen," Caroline began, her voice strong and clear, "what you're about to see represents not just scientific achievement, but the power of persistence, truth, and love." I squeezed her hand briefly before stepping forward to share our results. The data was impressive. Over 50 endangered species saved from extinction, a revolutionary cultivation technique now adopted worldwide, and a new generation of botanists trained in our methods. The standing ovation lasted 5 full minutes. Afterward, we were surrounded by colleagues offering congratulations and collaboration proposals. But my favorite moment was watching a young lesbian couple approach us shyly. "You inspired us," one of them said. "Not just with your research, but by showing us we don't have to choose between who we are and what we love to do." Back at our garden, changes bloomed everywhere. The research department I now co-directed had tripled in size. Our rare species section had become a model for conservation gardens worldwide. "Remember when this was all just dreams and blueprints?" Caroline mused as we walked through the expanded greenhouse complex. I touched my orchid pendant, thinking of how far we'd come. Sometimes the best things grow from the smallest seeds. That evening, we hosted a celebration in the rooftop garden where Caroline had proposed. Staff, students, and board members mingled under twinkling lights, toasting to our success. "A toast," Chairman Rogers raised his glass, "to the finest leadership team this garden has ever seen, and," he winked, "the most romantic." Later, Caroline led me to a quiet corner of the garden. "I have something to show you," she said, pulling out a leather-bound portfolio. Inside were press clippings, photographs, and letters spanning our years together. The first threatening letter that brought us together, a photo of our first kiss in the greenhouse, the article announcing our engagement. "Our story," she explained, "preserved like the rare blooms we protect." Tears pricked my eyes as I turned the pages, every struggle, every triumph carefully documented. Even the hard times, Martha's threats, the grant cancellation, the whispered judgments, seemed beautiful now, part of the path that led us here. "And look," she pointed to the final page. "Room for many more chapters." I kissed her then, tasting salt and joy. "I love you," I whispered against her lips, "more than all the rare flowers in all the world's gardens." The party continued around us, but we stayed in our quiet corner, planning future adventures, new species to save, new students to mentor, new ways to protect the beauty we'd found together. "You know what's funny?" Caroline mused, playing with my orchid pendant. "Martha thought she could destroy us by threatening what we loved most. Instead, she brought us together," I finished. "Like a forest fire that leads to new growth." As if on cue, our rarest orchid, the one that started everything, bloomed above us, its delicate petals catching the moonlight. "Perfect timing," Caroline smiled. "Nature always knows best." I looked at my wife, radiant in the garden she'd helped create, and felt overwhelming gratitude for every twist of fate that led us here, for every battle that made us stronger, for love that, like our rarest blooms, had proven both delicate and indestructible. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more species to save, more minds to open, more beauty to protect. But tonight, in our garden of rare flowers and precious moments, we were exactly where we were meant to be. Ready for our next adventure? Caroline asked, her blue eyes twinkling. I answered with a kiss, knowing that sometimes the most beautiful stories, like the rarest flowers, never truly end. They just keep blooming, season after season, growing more precious with each passing year. Above us, stars twinkled like fairy lights, and the night air carried the sweet scent of victory, of love, of endless possibilities waiting to bloom.